Hey everyone, and welcome back. Now today I wanted to talk about something specific within the ICP ecosystem that could potentially replace a $222 billion a year industry, which would be insane, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about what Utopia is and how it could replace the entire IT security industry, which would be really, really crazy. But before we do that, I wanted to spend a little bit of time looking at charts, just talking kind of a little bit about what the state of things are currently, what we could be seeing in the future, all that type of stuff, and then we'll go further into kind of what we're seeing within the ICP ecosystem. So to start, I wanted to take a look at the ICP chart. And what we can see here is we have come down a little bit over the past couple of days. We did top out like just shy of $10, as I think $9.98, almost $9.99 was kind of the high that we had hit before we started kind of coming down. What we have seen is we have broken through this level of support. Unfortunately, I was hoping that we kind of maybe set some volume up in this area and establish a pretty decent line of support here, but we haven't. So the most likely opportunities or the most likely outcomes, I guess I should say, are probably somewhere around like this 895 range, potentially all the way back to like this 866 range. That's kind of what it seems to me, just based on where we've seen previous levels of support and resistance. So I would imagine that we continue to keep falling a little bit, but it's not really too bad. We have seen some pretty bullish moves up from the bottom that we saw here kind of at the beginning of September. We have broken out of this wedge. We are still above this wedge, which is good overall. And so, if we come back and have to settle and make some support here, that's fine. Even if we come back and have to retest the top of this trend line, I think that's okay as well. I mean, ideally, the higher that we can kind of hold and put in some volume, the better. But overall, nothing seems to be too concerning about the ICP ecosystem as far as price action is, at least. Everything kind of seems to be decent. What we can see if kind of we're looking at the scroller on the bottom here is kind of everything is down. If we go and look at Bitcoin, we can see that we have actually seen a pretty dramatic drop over here in the past couple of hours. I did actually take a Bitcoin trade that we can see is up almost 235% at this point. You could see we both were approaching the top of this channel that I've been talking about for about months now. You can see, we were starting to see some wicks here. That to me looked like, we were potentially going to be getting rejected, as well as the liquidation maps that we have looked at relentlessly over the past couple of videos, over the past week or so. And so, obviously it does look like we are starting to move down into the channel. Again, of course, maybe this gets wicked up and we start to see some stronger momentum to the upside here. But, I think it's possible that maybe we make it down into this area. I have mentioned on the channel before, I do think it's a possibility we revisit this liquidity zone. As I've also mentioned, I'm not totally married to the idea just because, we have seen some wicks dip into this liquidity zone, briefly in the past. So I'm not totally set on this, but I do think that, this type of correction is relatively healthy. I mean, we have been kind of pretty much up only for quite a while now. So seeing some sort of correction, maybe even if we settle kind of at this level, I think would actually be pretty bullish overall. But it's hard to say. It does look like we're going to be moving down potentially kind of where we settle out. Maybe it's a little too early to tell. If this is something you are interested in doing and you want to trade up to 100x leverage, please feel free to check out the link in my description. You don't need to KYC or need a VPN to use Margex as well, so you can essentially just get signed up and start trading, which is really nice. Also, they do have up to a $10,000 deposit bonus if that's something that you're interested in. They also do kind of like community events now and again. They are just finishing up their $500,000 CASP airdrop. So again, if this is something that you're interested in, feel free to check out the link in the description below. As I do mention basically every time that I talk about Margex, leverage trading is definitely very risky. So if this is something that you're not super familiar with, or maybe aren't super experienced, I would say be very, very careful before you get into it, just because it does not come, it does come with its own set of risks. So anyway, just be careful and be responsible if you are doing that. But moving on, what I wanted to check out was this recent-ish article. It was at the end of June. We could see that DFINITY actually announces this new ICP-powered platform to tackle cybersecurity, and this is Utopia. And so Utopia is really interesting because it solves challenges with two things particularly. So government sovereignty, and essentially what they're trying to get to here is Utopia aims to help governments attain sovereignty through AI, but the recent lack of digital asset guidance suggests governments might not be ready or willing to fully embrace the technology. Now, what they're essentially trying to do is they're trying to set up a government, or not a government, sorry. They're essentially trying to set up a framework that helps governments essentially kind of have not be like at a disadvantage in that like AI arms race, as people are calling it, right? And so that's one of the things that they're really trying to help out with. The other thing that Utopia is really aimed for is to help with cybersecurity threats. We can see that, there was a recent ransomware attack on London hospitals involving almost 400 gigabytes of patients' personal data. Essentially, if we look at all of 2024, there were almost 9,500 publicly disclosed data breaches that hit almost 36 billion records. So, obviously, this is something that's definitely a very, very large problem. The IT security industry is a $222 billion industry annually, and it's expected to grow, obviously, fairly dramatically up until 2030, just because as our lives become more digital, of course, we do need to protect that information. And so one thing that's really cool about what ICP is trying to do is they're trying to essentially have a platform that helps address this issue. Now, one thing that I wanted to point out before we get into kind of the final article that addresses this is if you look on ICP's website, if you look up here, I'm already on the AI assistant, but you can see that it's this button right here. This is an AI assistant. And what you can do is you can go in and you can see, I just went in and typed Utopia, right? And then what they did is they were able to essentially go through and give me a full write-up about what Utopia is, how it works, why it's important, as well as a whole bunch of different sources in terms of like where it got this from, right? And so the one that I clicked on is this one, this Future of IT. And so we can see this here. It's actually an article from Dominic Williams, who's the head of ICP. And so this is really, really interesting and obviously a quite nice article that pretty succinctly sums up what they're trying to do and what Dominic sees as the future of IT. And so if we look at the bottom here, obviously, it's a fairly short article. So if it's something you're interested in, kind of reading the whole thing, feel free to go check this out. But what we can see at the very bottom here is just kind of a quick like summary or a quick kind of like wrap up statement by Dominic of what he's hoping Utopia will be. And so he says, later this year, you will hear more about Utopia technology, which stands for Unstoppable, Tamper-Proof, Open Platform for Independent Autonomy. Each Utopia is a private cloud, which can be spun up over existing clouds or dedicated hardware as needed. This year, enterprises and governments will begin building on these advanced serverless cloud environments using next-generation canister smart contract software written in any language running on the WebAssembly virtual machine. Welcome to the brighter future. Now, obviously, there's a lot to unpack here, but this is pretty interesting overall, right? Because one thing that they're saying is Utopia is a private cloud. Now, this can be utilized with ICP's hardware that they already have. They have, I think it's like 1,600 nodes globally now. So if, like, let's say I wanted to spin up a private cloud, I wouldn't need to buy all the servers and get like the IT security team and all this stuff to do this. I could just set it up on ICP's infrastructure. However, if we wanted to get our own hardware, we could do that. Now, this is important because if you think about, like, let's say like militaries or potential like global governments, things like that, they may, even though there's not necessarily a security risk with ICP's hardware, they may want to run this on their own hardware just so they can do kind of some of their own testing and validation and stuff on, essentially kind of the red tape and bureaucracy that we all know and love with governments and, all that type of stuff. So, that's something that's really cool because it is flexible. Another thing is I actually have a friend, he's a web developer, and I was talking to him this weekend. And one of the things that is really kind of a sticking point for him with Web3 and crypto and all this type of stuff is Solidity, right? Like that is the language of smart contracts generally. And so here, this written in any language piece is really, really key. Because part of the issue with Web3 is there's such a high barrier to entry, right? Like you can't just use JavaScript to go code a like a decentralized application, right? Like that's not a thing that you can do currently in like this like standard Web3 space, right? So the fact that ICP allows something to be written in any language is super, super important because it now means every single software developer out there can develop on ICP. Because it's written in any language, so there's no like new language or any like type of coding thing or anything you have to learn. It's just all figured out. And so this is something that's really, really important as well. And I really wanted to highlight because one thing that obviously cybersecurity is a $200 billion a year industry. If ICP essentially removes the like vulnerabilities of the cloud, what is IT in like IT infrastructure and IT security and all this type of stuff? What do they need to do? right? So this is something where if that's the case, and this is something that we're actually going to get back to probably in a future video when we discuss the cost of ICP again. I'll do a bit of an updated video. I've kind of learned some more recent information about, even though ICP on their website kind of quotes the cost per month as one particular thing, it's a little bit more complex than that, in the sense that there's data in and data out costs, and those can vary, and depending on what you're using, that can change the cost and all that type of stuff. And so one of the things that we're actually going to discuss in that future video is the IT component to it as well, because even if you just, let's say, host on the cloud, you need to have a team that can like manage that data, make sure it's being treated properly and it's not risky. And it, if you do get a ransomware attack, like how do you deal with it? How do you even prevent one from happening in the first place? There's a lot of different questions that need to be answered here. And so that's one of the things that I want to talk about in the future video is, even if you are paying more for cloud hosting on ICP, how much more is it worth, right? Not having to deal with some of the potential business risks of a software breach or a hack, or data being lost or ransomed or stolen or anything like that. So that's another really, really important piece. So hopefully you found this information useful. If you did, please do give me a like and subscribe. It really does help me out. Also, if you have any questions, comments, feedback, all this type of stuff, please do leave me a comment below. I can't understate the fact that you guys are very, very helpful in helping me learn and clarify and correct anything that I may be misunderstanding or whatnot. I am just one person. I obviously don't have complete and total information over all of the happenings in the crypto space at all times. And so, I do really appreciate your guys' feedback and input if there is something that I need to clarify or whatnot. So anyway, thank you guys for doing that. Please do keep it up. It really does help me out. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next video.